So I have about 6 or 7 knives here that I want to do long-term knife reviews on. Now, some of these knives I've had a lot longer than others, but every single one of them I've used and have sharpened a lot. So at this point, I feel comfortable talking about them in a long-term kind of way. So the first one we're going to start off with is the MANIX in 15V with the triple B heat treat. So SPYDERCO MANIX 2. We're not really going to talk about the knife too much. I do have aftermarket scales, but we're mostly going to just talk about the 15V. I've had multiple MANIX 2s. Awesome knife. I love the knife to death. I think it's one of the best pocket knives you can buy. I think it is one of the best locking mechanisms you can get on a knife. Super tough, very reliable. It's a lock that works long term, meaning like if you're going to open and close your knife a million times and use your knife, you know, a lot, it's a lock that stays solid, and it feels just as solid as the first time you open it as the 10,000th time, which I do appreciate on a knife. So in my opinion, it's a knife that's made to be used and loved. But as far as the 15V goes, so, you know, I know this steel hasn't been out for that long, and some of you will probably be shocked to know that I've already sharpened mine 3 times. But the reason why was because I was trying to test different edges. So the first edge I put on it was around 600 grit, a medium grit edge, which it did very, very well. Then the second edge I put on it, we'll go back to that in a second, but the second edge I put on it was a mirror polished edge. So the mirror polished edge, it took and held a mirror polished edge very, very well, but not as well as the medium grit edge, but still very well. So as far as sharpening it goes, this steel is phenomenal to sharpen. It feels very hard on the stone. When you bring up the burr, deburring and removing the burr is a breeze. And when you have the ability to sharpen a steel and remove the burr nice and cleanly, very easily, it gives you the chances of coming out with a high level of sharpness edge than if not. It gives you have way more chances of your edge coming out phenomenal if the burr is easy to remove. And this is a great example of a steel where the burr just pops right off. You know, you can feel the steel super hard, you can feel the burr super hard, you know, you fatigue it and it pops right off, and I love that because then it reveals a nice clean apex. Now, if it wasn't like that, maybe if it was softer and the burr went back and forth and was a trouble to remove, what can happen is the burr can possibly take steel with it when it's removed, or possibly leave steel on the apex. So I really like the way this steel sharpens up. I love the types of edges it takes. Now back to the polished edge. So as far as the polished edge goes, it took and held a good polished edge, but not as good as the medium grit edge. So then I thought, so maybe a toothy edge is the way to go. So then the last edge I put on it was a very toothy edge. So I put a very coarse edge on there, around 300 grit, and it did well, but not as good as the medium grit again. So what happened is it's very toothy when you put a toothy edge on there. Almost too toothy. And if you look at my edge right now, you'll notice there's some spots not quite hit. That's because the first couple edges I put on were freehand edges, and the second one was slightly convexed. So this last edge I put on here was on a fixed angled system. So it, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to hit some parts of the edge considering the last edge was semi-convexed. But it's plenty enough that I've been able to test a toothy edge on it. You know, anyways, the point is that from my experience, my limited experience, because I've only had one knife in 15V, I think a medium grit edge is the best edge. I think between 600 and 1200 grit, I think would be the best edge you could put on this steel. If you want a polished edge, go for it. It will take and hold a good polished edge. However, you know, it will start losing its bite faster than it will if it was a medium grit edge. Now, I'm not saying it's gonna be bad or chipping or you know, super dull or anything like that, but it loses its bite and then it starts getting a little slippery. But like I said, it still held it for a long time, but the medium grit edge, I think from my experience, it'll hold it the longest. So all in all, as far as long term goes, so far from, you know, how long I've had it being the only example, I love it. I love this steel. I can't say it's my favorite yet, K390 is my favorite at the moment, but I will say, man, it could be if I had a couple more examples, you know, I'd find out. Let's get to the next one. The next knife is the SENCUT SACHSE. SENCUT SACHSE, man, this was one of my most recommended affordable knives when it came out. And, you know, this is another, or one of the examples of SENCUT / Civivi / Wiese button locks that really pushed me over the edge on how I felt about their button locks. This is one I've used quite a bit. I've sharpened multiple times. 9CR 18 MOV. Takes a good edge. Again, I think it takes a medium grit edge the best. You know, it seems that 9CR, which is very similar to 440C, when you put a polished edge on there, especially the higher the angle, but if you put a polished edge on there, it gets slick pretty quick. So putting a medium grit edge on there kind of keeps the bite going for a lot longer with the edge, because it's not the longest lasting edge retention as it is. Now it's good, but not the longest. So one good thing though is it does maintain well. You can strap it back, you know, and it does bring back the bite a little bit. But as far as this button lock goes, I have used and open and close this thing thousands of times. I've used the heck out of it and it is still rock solid. Now I gotta say, not all button locks are created equally. I know a lot of us are a little worried about button locks because we've seen so many of them fail. And that's true. Some will fail. Some will, over 1,000 flips, start getting blade rock. And I've seen it 100 times. So I understand that feeling. However, some are very solid. Some can be used pretty tough. And some can be flipped thousands and thousands of times without getting rock. It just depends on the lock face geometry. You know, I have some knives that would be considered hard use knives that have button locks. And there's rock solid, super solid. So I do think SENCUT is doing a great job with their button locks. Not only their detent and action, but the lockup. Yes, I have a hint of lock stick, but the way I look at it is I would prefer a hint of lock stick. I actually prefer having a little bit of lock stick as long as it's a small amount, because that tells me that the lock is engaged nice and strong. That tells me I don't have any up and down. It seems that a lot of knives with button locks, when they absolutely have absolutely zero stick, and it's just a spongy button, that is when pretty soon after it starts getting a little bit of up and down. So that's why I don't mind a little bit of stick. I'm not saying that's gonna happen every time, but it's happened a lot to me. So it's something I think about. All in all, the SENCUT SACHSE, fantastic user, fantastic budget knife. Definitely a highly recommended affordable knife. It has a perfect blade shape, great ergonomics, great clip, great weight, great everything. It's just a fantastic user, and they use T8 hardware all the way around. You know, it's a knife that seems like it's built to be used. It's built to be maintained, and I appreciate that, especially for such an affordable price. Next, the Quiet Carry 9. Now, I have reviews on just about all these knives, so, you know, if you really want to know, or first impressions and things like that, I have other videos on all these knives. So if you want to see more information on the knives, go and check those videos out. This is basically just a long term, so I'm not going to get into all the details, but 20 CV, titanium frame lock, made in Taiwan. Now, this is one of my favorite knives. It's definitely in the top 20 of all-time favorite knives. It's probably my favorite knife of the year. You know, there's some other knives coming out this year that could possibly take its place, but this has been just such an absolute badass knife to me. I think it is done so well. And they're steel, they're 20 CV steel. I think that Quiet Carry is doing a good job with their 20 CV. So just to give you a little bit of an example, I have another knife, Hinderer. Hinderer runs their steel on the softer side. I put a mirror polished edge on the steel, and it very quickly lost all its bite. And the edges don't hold up that long as it is. They go dull rather quickly for 20 CV. But it loses its bite so fast, so in order for it to hold the best edge possible, I have to put a medium grit or a toothy edge on it. Now, as far as this goes, I put, you know, a similar edge on it, this knife, in, you know, 20 CV, and it is holding the bite out perfectly. It's holding the bite a lot. Like, I've sharpened it a few times, and the polished edge just, it stays nice and sticky for a very long time. The edge lasts a very long time. I have very little microchipping, right? But I do think that's my fault. I probably hit something. And to be honest, I would rather have an edge that lasts a very long time, that stays sharp for a very long time and stays nice and sticky, that possibly has tiny, tiny bits of microchipping, over a knife that goes dull faster and that loses its bite really quick, right? Because this knife, even though it has tiny, tiny hits of microchips, I can use this still probably for another month, depending on how much I use it, but I still use it a lot. So very happy with how they do their 20 CV. I think I'm not sure they're HRC, but I do think they're doing a good job with it at the very least. It might not be the hardest HRC, but you know, like I said, it took a really good edge, held a really good edge, and held the bite. Now, the clip, one of the best clips I've ever experienced on a knife. I wish I could get this clip on every single knife. I love this clip. And one of the reasons why it is so good is because of the finish it's on and because they put the lock bar cutout on the inside. Since the lock bar cutout is on the inside, there's nothing catching underneath the clip. The action and detent is perfect. It's so smooth. The ergos are great. Like I said, one of my favorite knives. You know, definitely one of my favorite knives of the year, if not my favorite knife of the year so far. But as far as just an all-time, of all my knives, of my collection, it's in the top 20 for sure. I love that knife. Let's get to the next one. The next one is the Terrain 365 in Terravantium. So it does not have steel. This is a Terravantium blade. Terravantium is not made of any iron, so it is corrosion proof. You cannot rust this thing. Now, I did do an edge retention test on this if you want to go watch it. Now, the problem is you can't really do an edge retention test on this stuff like you can do on another steel or on a steel. And the reason why is because this stuff supposedly holds a toothy edge for an incredible amount of time. Now, I do think that that is mostly true. The thing is, though, is that in order for us to do edge retention tests, you have to base it off of it cutting something cleanly, right? So I put an edge on it, does it cut cleanly through paper? And then how long can I cut before it'll stop cutting cleanly through paper? So if you looked at it based on those terms, it's about 14C, 28 ends edge retention, which is really good. I'm happy with that. However, it actually shouldn't be tested like that. The way it should be tested is how long will it stay toothy? Because what happens is when you start cutting with it, it gets toothier and toothier and toothier. That's what actually happens. So while it backfires while cutting paper, it makes it to where it hangs up in paper. The return is it actually becomes more saw-like, which is how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like a saw blade. You know, you don't really slice with it, you saw with it. So if you were gonna hold it to those standards, you would basically test it until it loses all its teeth, which the teeth are going to be hanging up in paper, so it's hard to do that test with it. So all in all, I do think it pretty much does what they say. It does stay toothy for a very long time. It is very thick. The geometry is very robust. It's not going to be the best utility cutter. It's not going to be the best slicer. It does have a titanium frame lock, very well done. I believe the blade is made in the USA. All the parts are made in Japan and then assembled in China. The action is stupid good. I do like the knife quite a bit, but it's definitely not a knife I grab to cut my boxes with. This would be a knife that you'd want to grab if you're going to be in an environment that has the potential to rust your knife to death, because this will survive that. And maybe something that you need a saw-like, you want your knife to cut for a very long time and not necessarily cleanly. It's not going to be shaving your face or anything like that. But as far as cutting rope, cardboard, things like that, you know, it'll hold that toothy, aggressive edge for a very long time. And it'll just get toothier and toothier the more you use it. But you know, all in all, like I said, it's not one I would grab to cut my boxes with or do regular EDC use with. It's a good knife. It's really cool. I love it, having it in the collection. I would definitely get it again because it's unique. It's something different, you know, not every company is making things like this, so I do appreciate that quite a bit. And I do appreciate its robustness because it's very tactical-like, and, you know, I do think you could be a little bit tougher on it. I did have lock stick before, but my lock stick has went away, even without me reapplying more and more marker. I might have to in the future again. I don't know, but it's not bad. A BENCHMADE BUGOUT. BENCHMADE BUGOUT. So I've had this for a very, very long time. And my feelings about it have been hit or miss. When I first got it, I had a lot of issues. Over time, they went away. And, you know, I did like the knife at first quite a bit after my problems went away. Back when I got this, BENCHMADE was going through a time where people started testing steels. So all the steel testers doing edge retention were doing edge retention tests. People were doing HRC tests, and we were doing a lot of steel tests that wasn't done previously. So companies were able to tell you things that were not true, like their HRC. Well, BENCHMADE wound up coming out where some of their steel was HRC tested a lot softer than what it should have been. And they tried to stand by that. However, very quickly after, they adjusted it. And since then, it seems like they've done a lot with their steels. So I do want to say, as far as right now goes, I do think they're doing a lot better job with their steels than they were back then. So that was around the time I bought this S30V. Now, I don't think this S30V is bad at all. I think it's fine. It's not the best. Like SPYDERCO's S30V is definitely better, far superior. But, you know, I don't think it's horrible, but, you know, it's, like I said, it could be a lot better now if you got a new one. But as far as the knife goes, it's super lightweight. I do appreciate everything about it, but mine over time has gotten significant up and down. Like significant. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Now, maybe I can just replace the Omega springs. Maybe I can send it in. I have no doubt that BENCHMADE won't cover it under their warranty. They'll take care of it. I have zero doubts. Although I do have aftermarket scales on it, which seem like they've always been pretty cool. So, you know, I could do that. But as far as recommending it goes and it being a good, solid knife to recommend, I can't recommend it. Because their prices just went up entirely way too high. I would recommend just get a Deka. A Deka you're going to get for a more affordable price, and if you get the MagnaCut, you're going to get better steel. So Hogue is doing a phenomenal job with their MagnaCut now. They did for the first edge retention test I did on their MagnaCut. It was when they were running it softer. They've now upped their HRC. Now it's 63 to 64, doing a phenomenal job with it, and it holds a great edge. Now I do recommend, if you do get the FRN one, getting original goat scales, although you could get the 20CV version. However, I wouldn't recommend that, but you could get the 20CV with the G10, and that's fine. You could do that. However, recently one of their knives came back with very low HRC on their 20CV. So that's why I would recommend the MagnaCut. I do think they're doing a lot better job with their MagnaCut over the 20CV. They do also have the Ultim scales now. If you don't want to get the FRN, they have the Ultim scales. I don't like the Ultim scales. Personally, for me, I just go original goat. Yes, you're going to have to spend more money, and at that point, you know, it's going to be even more than the BUGOUT. But you're going to have a better knife. It's going to be more solid. Like mine is rock solid. Absolutely rock solid. The fit and finish, the tolerances on my scales are perfect. I love this knife. I adore this knife, and I highly recommend the Deka. I think the Deka is amazing, especially when you put the scales on it. When you put the scales on it, everything changes. One more. The CMB Predator. So the CMB Predator, we'll go through this one quick. I speak about this knife quite a bit because I love it, and I've had multiples of them. I had the D2 version, which I do like the 14C better, which that's what this one is. I've sharpened both of them multiple times. I think I've had 3 of them. Anyways, I've even gifted some of them away. But the CMB Predator, in my opinion, is one of the best work knives you can get. It is an amazing knife under 70 bucks, or right around 70 bucks. The original one was 50 bucks with the D2. Now it's about 70 bucks, but this knife is made to be used. Let me explain. So it has a drop point blade with a tip lower than the center of the pivot, which works great. It's great for piercing and it's great for utility cutting. Then you have a sharpening tool and plunge grind that's made to be sharpened. I've sharpened this knife multiple times. Aside from looking at the edge, you wouldn't know by looking at the plunge grind, because this thing is like kind of like a Sabenza. The choil, or the sharpening tool and plunge grind, is so far back that you have so much life to sharpen off. You can sharpen this thing for years and it not, you know, affect anything, you know. So that's awesome. It makes it to where by the time you hit the plunge grind, you're gonna want to throw the knife away as it is. The ergonomics in the blade they complement each other great. It has great ergos, and the geometry of the blade, you know, is great for the ergonomics. So as far as use goes, it's amazing. Then they have some of the strongest omega springs I've ever felt on a knife. So the only knives I've ever felt that had similar omega springs to this was Ganzo when they first started doing crossbar locks. Their springs were so strong, people were taking them out and bending them to break them in fast. This is incredibly strong, but I love that because to me, it makes a good detent, and it makes the knife so damn solid. Mine is like a vault. I did hear of one person say that their lock was slipping. All three of mine, I've spine whacked the heck out of, never had a hint of failing. It's rock solid, and these are super strong locks if the lock face geometry is done well. I can't speak on that one guy's example, but mine have all been super duper solid. So strong lock, great blade shape, phenomenal steel, 14C28M. And I don't think they do a bad job with it. 14C is very easy for companies to heat treat, especially in mass production. So they do a decent job with it, and it's a steel that is easy to sharpen, takes a really good edge, and it strops back very well. So you can basically put any edge you want on there. You can put a mirror polished edge, you can put a toothy edge, you can put a medium grit edge, it doesn't matter. It holds it all perfectly fine. I prefer a little bit lower angle edges. Now you don't have to go ridiculously low, but putting a low angled edge on there does bring out the most out of 14C from my experience. But anyways, the CMB Predator, I definitely recommend, and from my experience, it has pushed itself into one of my most recommended work knives, especially now, you know, that I've had it for so long, and it's just held up so well. Highly recommended. Anyways, work hard, stay tough. You know society's relying on you. Until next time, peace.